Well, good morning, folks. I know I was in a really fascinating session from Rachel Haroldson this previous one, learning about literacy and computer science. So I hope that you're having a great day at the MinCodes conference. Christa and I are here to share information about models and advice, excuse me, that we've gathered on creating pathways for computer science by talking to a number of districts here in Minnesota. So I'm Jennifer Rosato. I'm the director of the Northern Lights Collaborative for Computing Education at the University of Minnesota. You may have known my work before when I was at the College of St. Scholastica and directing the National Center for Computing Education. So over the last couple of months, we've transitioned to the University of Minnesota, and this is my new home. Christa, do you want to give a quick introduction?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Christa Treichel, and I've been working with Jen now and other people for a couple of years on different CS related projects. But what I do generally is I do program evaluation and educational research as a consultant, and I'm based in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Thanks, Christa. Um, Okay, so we are going to do some polls throughout the presentation today. And did I just forget to take it out? I may be sharing the wrong link. Because this does not have the poll everywhere stuff. We can do this first one like this though, and I will search for the right link here in a minute. But just wondering what brings folks to this session this morning. If you're kind of in the just curious and hoping to learn more, or if you're in the, you know what, I need some really solid information about what we're doing because, or what other schools are doing because we're going to do it in our school over the next year. So please feel free to, drop a 1, 2, 3, 4 in there or share text in the chat about what you're hoping to learn today. Okay, great. So some folks are coming from schools that have a pathway. Some folks are coming from schools that are looking to build a pathway. All right. So today we're just going to, in terms of agenda, we're going to take some time to go through what we learned from the interviews and what we saw in terms of common pathways in Minnesota school districts, some of the content and curriculum that's used, some of the process and like who is doing it, what are the teams that are doing it within the buildings, how are they collaborating across the building, both with teachers and administrators, but also external to the building. Who else are they working with? How do they generate buy-in? How are they thinking about equity? And how are they looking to expand their pathway longer term? And then and with some words of advice, and then plenty of time for Q&A, hopefully at the end, so we can just have a little more discussion there. So let me put the next one up here. So hopefully by the end, you will be familiar with what Minnesota schools are doing in terms of offering computer science and what their pathways look like, what that content and curriculum looks like, and the people who are involved and the processes that they used for building the pathways, and can take away some strategies that you can use in your own context with your school. So, and I think we just have like oh, there's a couple more people in here. I think we can just use the chat for responses though, because otherwise I'd have to stop screen sharing and I don't want to cut into Krista's time to talk. So in terms of thinking about a K-12 pathway in elementary, middle, and high school, so that's what we're using to define as a pathway, is that a school or a district is offering CS at all of those levels, not necessarily at every single grade, but that they have some sort of sequence from elementary up to middle to high school. What would be your guess in terms of how many districts in Minnesota have a full K-12 pathway? So why don't you drop your guess in the chat there? Less than 28%. Oh, that's a very specific number. 5, 8. Any other guesses? Well, you're not far off, but you've underestimated. So let me turn this over. Oh, see, and there the poll things are showing up. I will skip this because you've already done it and turn it over to Krista so she can talk more about the work that we did and what we found out.
Absolutely. I'm excited to get started. Jen, thanks for the introduction and the background. I'm really happy to be here to talk with all of you today about CS pathway making in Minnesota schools and districts. But before I jump into the formal presentation part, I do want to thank all of the teachers who took time to talk with us. They answered our follow-up questions, they provided materials about their CS programs, and we really appreciate their contributions. I feel very privileged to share what we've learned, and I will do my best to present all of the examples correctly. So if anyone is here who we interviewed, I will count on you to correct any points that I may have misrepresented. And another introductory point is that most of the presentation will be a high-level look at CS pathway making, but we can get into the details during the Q&A. So let's get started. So back to that question about how many schools are offering a CS pathway. First, I'll say here's the total list of schools schools and districts who talked with us for this interview project. So there are 11 different schools and districts, and you'll notice that 5 of them have a number by them. And those 5 schools, Lake Bloomington, Hermantown, Minnetonka, and St. Paul Academy and Summit schools, they have the CS pathway as Jen explained, using our definition. So at least a sequence from elementary all the way through high school where students can take different kinds of CS for their own learning. If you move to that next column, it's the designation of whether they're a public, private, or tribal school. And then the X's in the columns elementary, middle, and high school will tell you if that school is offering CS and at what level. So let's jump to the next slide, Jen. So I think people are very interested in what other schools and districts are offering when it comes to CS. And so we want to share some of that information with you. And we also have a resource document that will be shared that gives you a lot more detail for the 5 schools who have the CS pathways K through 12. So you'll get a much more detailed look at elementary, middle, and high school, more information about the frequency with which classes are offered. And each of those schools also has a website, and we've provided that for more information because those websites provide a lot more background than we can go through here today. So I would encourage you to look at that too. So for elementary schools, generally speaking, you find a couple of different approaches. There's a lot of different types of learning that's being offered. So some of the people we talked with said that their school or district, they are doing more of an integrated approach. So they are working with their general classroom teachers to bring CS into other content areas. But then other people use specialists to deliver that kind of teaching. And so, for example, I wanted to highlight Hermantown. So they have 2 specialists at the elementary level who see all students between the 2 of them. And one is a technology specialist and the other is a STEM specialist. And so both of them bring CS learning into what they're already doing with students. So that's an example. And then also highlighting the hour of code that is listed there. So another example is one of the ways that Fond du Lac Tribal School decided to bring in CS learning was to bring in hour of code, and then they time that to when they have early release days, and they do that at the elementary level. So Jen, next slide. Middle schools are really interesting in Minnesota when it comes to CS, and there's quite a bit of diversity. So in some cases, you have schools or districts that are requiring CS for all of their students at grades 6, 7, and 8. And other schools are providing electives, or they do something unique, like at Owatonna, they have what they call these wheel classes, where they offer CS, different kinds of content for grades 6, 7, and 8, and that happens for 6 weeks. And I also wanted to highlight that middle bullet point, STEAM. That is a class that is offered at Hermantown, again, for all grades at the middle school level: science, technology, engineering, the arts, as well as math. And the other thing about middle schools that is really important is how they function in terms of being that bridge in between elementary and middle school, or excuse me, and high school. And so we'll talk more about that later. So let's go on to the high school slide. And here you can see quite a list of different kinds of opportunities for students. And so, very common kinds of courses like AP, CSP, for example. So there's a long list, and what you'll find is that in some cases, schools are saying, we are taking a close look at our student population and we're thinking about what kinds of classes would they be interested in? Do we need to offer more introductory classes, kind of foundational, or do we need to offer more advanced types of learning? And so some of the classes that would be, I think, more uniquely positioned in certain school districts, you have cybersecurity or data science, for example. And so people are really trying to match student interest with what it is that they offer. And another interesting school to talk about here is Rochester Public Schools. So they have what's called C-Tech. So they have quite a lot of interest from their students in career and technical education opportunities, and they've really capitalized on that. And one of the areas is in CS. And so they have a two-branched CS path at the high school level where students can focus on programming or data science. So there's a lot of different ways to bring this type of learning into different school settings. So let's move on to the next slide, which is a graphic that we wanted to include because we thought it would be helpful to show you some of the detail about the process that people go through to build a pathway. So if you start in the center, you'll see that little, actually right above that, Jen, the establishing the pathway is a multi-year process. So when we did the interviews, people said, gosh, we've been doing this for 5 years, or we've been doing this for 10 years. And sometimes they would say, well, we had a teacher who was teaching a class kind of CS related at the high school level for a long time, and that person retired, and it became the opportunity for us to begin to do something more CS focused. And so then if you kind of jog down and to the left, you'll see that CS pathways are typically initiated by a person or a small group. And I want to highlight how important passion is to unite people who are doing CS in Minnesota. And so often that is what gets the pathway started. And it's also important to know for people who think, well, this isn't something that I could do because I don't have any formal training. I'm not licensed in this area. And most of the people that we talked with, they don't have that background either. But what they will do often is say, I would like to offer this class in CS, often at the high school level. I'm going to go outside of my school district. I'm going to get credentialed through the PD that they offer, and then I'm going to bring it in to my school district. So once you see this work begin, the idea of a CS team, that happens usually later in the process. So who's part of those CS teams? The math teachers are really the most common denominator for the CS teams, and often the people who start building the pathway. But you'll also see that there are STEM teachers, there are people working in IT, tech integrationists, as well as sometimes people who are media or library staff and administrators. And I want to say something special about administrators here. They may not be involved so much in the day-to-day activities of planning the pathway or maintaining the pathway, but they are really key supports in keeping the pathway going. And often what I heard is, well, they help our CS team navigate the district. They help us understand who we need to talk to, who might have some budget available, whether we should be thinking about incorporating CS into our strategic plan. And so I don't think there was one person who didn't mention how important an administrator was. And then that dotted line off of the CS teams, that's another important feature that I wanted to call out. So I named them auxiliary members, people who are counselors or their staff involved in registration. They can also be really important in establishing the pathway because they can help students understand what sequence of courses they might want to take, where they could start, if they're eligible to do all of the classes. And I think everyone said maintaining a certain number of students enrolling in our courses means we can continue to offer the course, we can expand to additional sections. It tells us how frequently we can offer the class. So those enrollment numbers are really an important part of building the pathway. And so thinking about counselors or registration staff as being part of who you want to communicate with is something else that's really important. And so now I want to go back up to the top of the page. Schools or districts begin offering CS learning. So when that happens, what you see is that they usually start in the high school. I don't think anyone didn't start in the high school. And while I expected that it would trickle down next to the middle school, it was more common that people would go from offering CS learning at their high school level to the elementary level. And we already talked about the different ways that people are trying to build CS learning into elementary. So once they do that, it is then common for them to think about, okay, this middle school level, how do we begin offering CS there? And this seems to be the level where it is challenging. Scheduling, again, electives versus required courses. And it is this critical bridge, as I said earlier, and I'm sure many of you understand why it is critical. There's a lot of research in CS about where students might show interest in CS learning when they're young and in elementary school, but sometimes middle school is where they discontinue being interested in some of those learning opportunities, or they might say, it's just not me. I don't really feel like I belong there. And yet, if you have a drop off of student interest and student opportunities to learn about CS at the middle school level, it has such an impact on what is happening at the high school level. And again, those enrollment numbers are really important. All right, Jen, next slide. So let's talk about collaboration. If you have people who are interested in helping with this pathway, how do you find time to be able to do planning and work together? And this is often a barrier. People will say, I have other people in my district who are interested, but we're in different schools, different locations, we have different prep times. But again, underlying this, that passion kind of helps people be creative and find ways to partner, meet, and plan. So if you think that is a possible barrier, I think it's good to know that hardly any of the schools that we talked with have an official CS department. They might have something that's a little like an ad hoc department. Like I heard, for example, in the Minnetonka schools, they don't have an official CS department, but they have a group of people who are working together on this pathway. And at the beginning of the school year, when there's the planning week before school starts, they get time. Their administrators say, we know you need this. And so during our PD week, we're going to give you time to meet together as a CS department. And the other thing that's worth mentioning, this was said by a number of people, it does take more time to build the pathway. So there is I think, an effort to try and come together more frequently when that is getting started. But once you begin to build that pathway, it does take less time to sustain it. And then the other part I wanted to highlight about collaboration is, so we've been talking about people within the school district, but there are also some external partners who are contributing to these pathways that I wanted to mention. And so we heard, for example, that Bloomington Public Schools collaborated with the U of M's Learning Technologies folks, and they were very helpful in establishing that pathway and building it out in Austin Public Schools. They have a partnership with their community college, Riverland Community College, and they do some things with them, as well as the Hormel Foundation is located in Austin, and they help to support some of their CS efforts. And that's similar too for open world learning. OWL is a school in the St. Paul Public Schools, and 3M has been a funder that contributes to their CS pathway. And then finally, another external kind of partner, I want to mention people who are in the business community or families who can contribute to the pathway either through sharing the kind of work that they do if they work in CS, so they come in and maybe do career fairs. And in Wayzata, they have a strong mentoring program at the high school level, and they really do rely on people in their community, either parents of students or other business people, to be mentors to the students who are interested in that program. Next slide, Jen. Okay, so here we have another poll about how easy or difficult it is to plan with your colleagues. So using a scale there, 1, it's difficult, 2, 3, 4, all the way to it's pretty easy for us, a number 5. Give you a moment to do that.
And you can feel free to drop it in the chat if you want to. If you're already on poll everywhere, that's great. You can put it in there too.
Yeah, thank you. Well, as people do the poll, why don't we go to the next slide? So let's talk about buy-in. I think people understand generally why this is important, but just to highlight a few of those points, something that we've observed over time is sometimes school schedules change, or the way people schedule their day, and then things change in terms of the opportunities for students to learn about CS. There are always new initiatives in education, and so then schools have to find time to carve out more minutes for students to focus on something else. And so having people in your school and district who understand why CS is important, what you're doing is really important to kind of maintain a bit of a hold on that precious time to offer CS learning for students. But interestingly, when we did the interviews, a lot of people are not necessarily explicitly focusing on efforts to build buy-in. And I think that can be for a couple of different reasons. I think it can be challenging if you're already working on building your pathway. Now you need to find more time to focus on buy-in, or it could be also that this is a bit of an area where people say, I'm not really sure where I should start if I'm trying to work on building buy-in. So let me share a few examples with you from the people that we interviewed. So that second bullet point comes from a couple of different schools who are based in more affluent communities. So this is Wayzata, Minnetonka, Blake, and SPA. And they have a lot of people in their community, as well as family members of students who either work in CS or have CS related kinds of jobs, and recognize that this is important, and they want this to be offered in the schools so that their students and their children can take advantage of that kind of learning. And it's interesting how that kind of external persuasion helped to convince some administrators, kind of get them over the hump to say, all right, we need to move in this direction. So that can be a source of influence. And sometimes people we've worked with in the case of Hermantown and Fond du Lac through a grant related to CS, they used some different strategies to build buy-in and decided that what they wanted to do is build that understanding for all of their teachers and staff. And so they decided that they wanted to incorporate CS learning opportunities into their PD. So very low stakes kinds of opportunities, hands-on learning opportunities for their teacher and staff, because they knew if people could see how this worked, that it might help them to feel less intimidated by CS. And also, it would spark some ideas that they would say, I can see my students being interested in this. This feels manageable. I have people who can support me if I'm going to do this. And so nudging them in the direction of offering CS. And then the last point I want to highlight comes from Blake. So the teacher who started building the CS pathway there is a math teacher at the high school level, and she wanted to bring in more learning opportunities, kind of encourage that to happen at the elementary school level. And she was a little bit newer to the district, and she knew she wanted to focus on building teacher relationships. And so she went into the elementary school and asked if she could be part of their meetings, their planning meetings. She knew she didn't want to say, you should be doing this, or I want you to do this. So she took a listening approach. And after a couple of meetings, she realized that there was an opportunity that she could capitalize on. So students at the elementary level have choice time once they finish doing their schoolwork. And she said, I could do your choice stations for you. I could make them CS focused. They rotate on a monthly basis, and I'll take responsibility for making those happen, the setup and the takedown. And that was a way for her to begin to build those relationships with teachers. And then that just grew over time to a stronger partnership. Next slide, Jen. And equity, certainly that is something that is very important. And everyone we talked to said, yes, we recognize the need to broaden participation. Some schools look really carefully, kind of in a formal way, at their data statistics, their enrollment demographics, and note the difference between who's taking their CS classes and what their total school population looks like. So watching that over time to see if they can move it in a direction where there is greater participation. And some look at their enrollment in a bit of a more informal way. They just kind of eyeball who's in their classrooms and say, how can we use intentional student recruitment strategies to build participation, broaden that amongst different demographic groups who we want to have taking advantage of these classes. And I liked how some people talk about this. They talked about it as warm invites or shoulder taps for student recruitment strategies. So very much a one-on-one kind of strategy where the teacher often has a relationship with that student and says, there's this class that you could take. I think you would be good at it. You would be welcome there. You're well prepared. And so taking a bit of a different approach when it comes to building that enrollment on the CS pathway. Other teachers talked about ensuring that their classrooms are inclusive places for students who may not typically be involved in CS. So thinking about, how do I make this welcoming? How do I make this a great learning opportunity for students of different backgrounds? And then in addition to what happens during the day in classes, some of the people we talked with said that they create out of school time opportunities. And so they're creating safe computing spaces or clubs for specific demographic groups, like I said, that they would like to attract and have participating on the CS pathway. Next slide. So here we have another poll, thinking about that buy-in again. So who do you need in your corner to support your CS efforts? Who's important in your district? Maybe both as a decision maker or classroom level teachers or specialists. Jen, should we put that in the chat again?
Yep, that works just fine.
Okay, perfect.
And I'm curious to hear what people say about this one to see if it resonates with some of the districts we worked with, or if people are tapping into other resources and staff in their school that we're not thinking about.
Yeah, definitely. Good point. Well, we'll keep monitoring the chat to see what you say. I'm almost done here with going through the slides. So if we could move to the next one, Jen, that would be great. So I saw that some of you are here today because your school is interested in expanding the pathway. And so as we've discussed, most of the pathways start at high school, move to elementary, and then take on middle school. And so here are a couple of points that are interesting. So if you have a pathway and you have CS learning happening at your middle school, what we noticed is that can be reflected at the high school level where those CS classes need to be expanded, not only to address demand. So as you build your pathway, you probably will have more students who are interested in taking the CS. So addressing demand, but also starting to offer those more advanced opportunities. So if they feel, pretty savvy with some of the CS classes that they're taking, what can you offer at the high school level that will still keep them interested? And so some people said what they are doing is developing a two-branched pathway, if you will, because they need to accommodate students who still might need some more introductory or foundational kinds of classes because maybe what was happening at the middle school level was not required, and so they need to start with some of the basics. But then you also might need to offer those more advanced courses for students who have been on that pathway for a while. And related to that, I think this idea of do you have classes with prerequisites or do you not have classes with requiring prerequisites is also interesting. And so people talked about this too, so that no prerequisites approach can work, especially early on if your pathway is new and you're trying to build enrollment in those classes. But then once your pathway becomes more established, maybe you do want to establish some classes with prerequisites so you can be sure that the students who are taking those classes are well prepared and they will succeed in those courses. And I will say, some schools take an interesting approach to this. They might not necessarily say that a prerequisite is required, but they do some things where they interview students and talk with them to make sure that, yep, this is a good fit for you. Like you're a freshman and you're interested. That's a little unusual, but in talking with you, we find out this would be a good fit. So welcome to the class. All right, and here's another question for you to think about. Put this in the chat. We're almost done here. So what would you do next in an ideal world as you think about your CS efforts? So we have a comment there that looks like it's related to the last question of who you need in your corner, your admin folks, principal, but also superintendent, CS Tech grant funding from corporations. Wow, lots of good ideas. State and federal government funding and support. And these last few things are especially important for public schools. Yes, thank you for that, Remy. Feel free to keep adding to the chat for what you would do next in terms of your CS efforts. And we'll share the last slide and then we'll open this to Q&A. So lots of really good advice from the people who are creating these pathways, and I love how different they are. There's so much wisdom out in this community here in Minnesota. So what I did is I'm not going to read these aloud to you. I'm just going to highlight them and give you a chance to mull those over. So that's the end of the presentation, and now we can open it up to Q&A unless, Jen, you have anything that you would like to say as we bring this to a close. Okay. All right. Well, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question or put a question in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer those. And the other thing I wanted to say is if you think of something later and you would like to email us with a question, please feel free to do that. We'll be happy to respond as best we can. Thank you for your time today.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to grab the link to that other document that Christa mentioned that has the additional content and curriculum for schools and drop that in the chat for you all here too.
Good, thank you.
I'd be curious for those of you who were on at the beginning and said that you were looking to expand your pathway, if you'd be interested or willing to share where your pathway is at now and what your thoughts are, what ideas you might have for expanding now that you've seen some of the other work that folks have been doing.
Yeah, good question.
There we go. And there's that link to the content and curriculum document.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm adjusting sharing settings because I'm just seeing that it's not available to anyone with a link. So if you clicked it, try refreshing and it should be good to go. There we go. I see people hopping into it.
Yep, good. I see that too now. Yeah, and I would say, uh, we did our best to find as many schools as possible. It probably isn't an exhaustive list of everyone who was out there. I mean, we certainly don't want to overlook anyone. And so uh, if you want to call out another school or district with a full CS pathway, please let us know. That would be great to hear.
I think some of you may have come and stayed in the same room and were in Andrea's session about the Minnesota state plan. So I was just going to call out that a lot of the pathways that we saw align with the recommendations in the state plan in terms of, almost they all offer, I think all except for one was offering a high school CS course. Many of them do middle school as a standalone CS course, and then a lot of them do elementary as an integrated or a specialist who maybe approaches it in an integrated way. And that definitely aligns with what was in the state plan in terms of recommendations. So
Hello, I just wanted to speak because I am a St. Paul Academy alumnus, so I'm very familiar with the vast, resources they have available to them for many different things. But I also went to public school through 8th grade, St. Paul Public Schools.
Ah,
And so the thing is, um, public schools really just don't have that kind of funding. And so in order for us to be competitive, we would need to have um, the equipment. Because the other thing about even if you get licensed, I'll just speak for our school, because of the federal funding that was available for I think it's the ARP funding or whatever, my principal was able to purchase a lot of different robots and equipment and things that before, you could just sort of talk to the kids about it, or if you knew somebody who had, a few, then you could borrow those for your class, or, if there was a lending library, then you're like, oh, great, or the Finch robots, you could get those sent to you, that kind of thing. But it's inconsistent, and then you can't have like a regular type of curriculum exactly. And so I just think that if we're going to have these pathways and if we're going to have CS education in schools, all the schools, that there also has to be then that equipment that goes along with it, to keep it, to maintain it. So.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Remy. I think that is also in the state plan, is that there needs to be funding. And, the folks, I was a member of the working group as well, and the folks who are on the working group don't want this to be an unfunded mandate for schools. We want there to be sufficient funding for every school, and we want that funding to be easily accessible for schools. I know that sometimes the writing grants and stuff like that is not always the easiest task for people who are in smaller schools and don't have those kinds of staff. I don't know how many people are aware of this or not, but there is a current bill both in the House and the Senate for Minnesota to put aside $8 million in funding for computer science education because of the state of the budget and mostly the future budget deficits that we're looking at. That's in danger of being reduced from 8 million. So if you are interested in speaking to your legislature about how much you support that, would encourage you to click the link for the Voter Voice campaign that's in the chat and let them know that it really needs to be 8 million, and it's super important that public schools get that funding. So just wanted to call that out. We could use all the support we can get to make sure that legislators are hearing that message. And then Jen, I saw you came, oh, sorry, go ahead, Remy.
Oh, the last thing I was just going to say is that obviously St. Paul's going through its budget cuts now. And in terms of specialists, CS Tech, they're not in the hierarchy of specialists. We're like at the bottom. Like, they're going to take science, and then it's like art and music, and then tech. So I don't know. It's just another thing for, if we're going to include tech then as a part of the regular classroom teacher gig, or what? Like, how is this going to work?
Right now it's optional in Minnesota to do the CS work. And so having the policies in place in terms of required K-8 CS standards as listed in the state plan would help prioritize it. Jen Wallace, you were gonna share?
Well, I just am wanting to comment based on what Remy was just saying. So I'm a library media specialist in Hopkins schools, and I have had a special interest in computer science and learning for the past 4 or 5 years. I have participated in the coding cohort through Code Savvy. I've learned a lot about computer science through a former job. I did a lot with robotics, but one of the things that's happening in Minnesota is, media specialists have been cut, and actually they're talking about cutting us right now in my current district and expanding computer science. And we as media specialists are trying to tell them, you can get a lot of bang for your buck with your media specialist because we are already licensed to teach computer science. Now, not a lot of we have learning to do. Like, my teammates are still they don't know a lot about it, but there are some of us who do, and we can do that exploring and exposing of both literature and stories as it relates to our young people learning literacy, and we can explore computer science and bring that to our kids and get them excited about that. So we've had hard discussions because they're wanting to cut us and have us reapply for our jobs, and it's jobs we already do. But anyway, that's drama. But my main point is that it can be done through that media program, and it would be a great way to do it. Now, there might need to be training involved, and I know that has been part of that $8 million legislation, but we have avenues to do it. And I don't know, I was going to ask Remy, I hope I'm saying your name right. I know St. Paul has cut media specialists and brought them back. I don't know if you have media specialists hired right now, but I think that's a great place to look to do this work. And I know too, there's like the reading bill is really important as we in our school too and through our state. And so like our classroom teachers are worried about, they don't want to teach more CS right now. And so the media program is a great avenue. I just wanted to mention
Yeah,
that.
they got our media specialist, like, I don't know, last year, the year before, after she'd gotten, I was on the tech committee also, and so we've been supporting her in writing this grant. She got a $10,000 grant for the school, and then also then our tech teacher was going to use that, or did use that, more. She used that. The tech teacher used the equipment more than the media specialist did. The media specialist did more like library type stuff, but it was still a nice partnership. And then they cut the media specialist, and but because it was the media specialist who wrote the grant, all the equipment went with the media specialist. Yeah. Or went back to
Interesting.
media specialist land. I don't know what happened to all of our robots and stuff we used to have. So then I was very glad that we had the AAR or ARP or whatever it is funding to get basically what we had before and a little bit more. And so, yeah, who knows?
And Remy, another just general comment about like the stuff and the robotics and the physical computing. I like, as the keynote speaker said, that's really fun and engaging, but it is a challenge of the work. Like, you have to maintain those things. They need updates. Then new technology happens like AI and the new things, and then they kind of get out of date fast. So I saw a comment, a recommendation on that slide that was just shared, just like to connect what you're doing to the concepts, to the the curriculum, to the computing concepts that we want our kids to know and have exposure to do, rather than the stuff. And then you can keep moving forward and not be tied to equipment that's dying. And there's some great programs that have been out there like code.org and Scratch Junior and Scratch that you can keep doing the work.
We
So
exactly, we use all that.
yeah. All right. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Anybody else have a final comment to share? Otherwise, we're almost at the end of our time here. Hopefully you got some good ideas and suggestions for where you might want to go with your computer science pathways in your school, whether you're expanding them or just starting them. And I think the slides have our contact information. I think Code Savvy is sharing those out, but just to make sure, I will drop my email in the chat here. If folks want to talk to us more, if you're working on a pathway and just want to talk through that with somebody else, happy to do that. So please feel free to reach out to me about pathways in Minnesota. I don't know if anybody on this call is from a rural school or a tribal school, but if you are, we are looking for a couple more rural and tribal schools to participate in our grant to develop models for CS pathways or pathways, computer science pathways in rural and tribal communities. And that would include some funding and professional development to support schools to do that. So if you're in a rural or a tribal school, please do reach out to myself, to me about that, and happy to, tell you more about the program and participating. Anything else, Christa?
No, it's really great to have everybody here. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you so much.
Hi,
Have a great day.
Hi, Jennifer. This is Aisha.
Hi, Isha.
Yeah, it was a pleasure hearing the contributors all across MN. So I am based out of Minnesota, and I've met Valerie before. So in regards to the computer science education for kids of various levels, right? Like high school, intermediate, undergrads, and grads. So I work in the field of cloud computing and artificial intelligence. I have like 1 decade of experience in IT. And I also have a master's degree in computer science. So I understand how important it is to give kids who will be future engineers the foundational coding layers and exposure to those coding aspects. So apart from coding, cloud computing is also another hot topic wherein it's very closely dependent. And just to help the community around, I published a website called One Stop for Cloud, which has all the educational content on 5 major public cloud platforms. Um, so, I mean, I did see that the Code Savvy is making efforts to expand computer science education to tribal and rural community as well. So currently the published content is available online and it's a free content. And probably the team can review it, and if it is of value to the kids, to provide them the necessary fundamentals that's needed, uh, I would be happy to provide it to them. And also, like, if there are any updates needed or if additional content is needed, I can definitely help um, the educators expand the knowledge. So
Thank
I
you.
posted
Yeah,
the
I appreciate you sharing the link in the chat there. I see that now, and we'll take a look at it. And you've got my email, so please do also feel free to reach out via email. And if you wanted to talk further about connecting, that would, happy to do that. So good to know that there's a cloud computing resource available for free that folks can use.
Sure, yeah. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.